So, Tom, without further ado, let's hear from our program guest.
Tonight we have Erin Spain. She's on the Zoom call with us tonight. Her presentation is on painted finishes. And I made you a co-host. You should be able to share your screen, Erin, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you for having me. My name's Erin Spain, and I am a design and DIY blogger and YouTuber. So I share DIY tutorials and decor ideas and things like that. So I'm going to share my screen here in just a minute. I have a video I'm going to be talking over throughout the whole thing, and I want to apologize in advance if my connection freezes up. When I first got on here, it froze for a second, so hopefully my connection will be okay. We shall see. So, all right, let me go ahead and share. So I'm going to start out by basics furniture painting before I get into some of the more custom finishes. Just for those of you who might not have a ton of experience painting furniture, first of all, I want to start by saying there are a lot of ways to paint furniture. There isn't just like one right way, but I'm going to share the technique that I use to get the smoothest, most professional looking finish possible, and also some of the products that I like to use and stuff like that. I have a full tutorial on my YouTube channel and website, so this is just going to sort of be the condensed Cliff's Notes version. So I'm going to start the video here, and I will be pausing it frequently. So the first thing you want to do when you're painting a piece, whether it's been painted previously or is right here for demonstration purposes, by the way, I'm painting a random bench. The first thing you're going to want to do is lightly sand, and then I'm going to pause for a second. Well, if I move my head out of the way, you're going to want to use wood filler on any of the knots or nicks or holes or anything like that before you sand. And then you can use a tack cloth, obviously, to get all of the dust off. But you really just want to clean it up and rough up the surface so that your paint has something to grab on. That's basically the goal here. You don't have to put a ton of time and effort into sanding. You don't have to sand the finish completely off. You just want to rough it up, because if you start with a really shiny, glossy surface, your paint is going to slide right off. So lightly sand, and then you're going to prime. And I like to use Kills or Zinsser primer. Those are just the brands I have the most experience with. And I usually use a foam roller and then a small angle brush to get into the nooks and crannies. I do like to use a separate primer, even if I'm using paint with primer built in. I've just found that I get better longevity that way and better adhesion. So that's my preference. And the key here to getting a good finish is, first of all, I usually just put one thin coat of primer, but then I add 2 to 3 coats of paint. And the key is adding multiple thin coats of paint rather than just a couple of thick coats, and then lightly sanding in between each coat. That's going to eliminate the brush strokes and the roller marks and just get it to look really, really smooth. You can add a product like Floetrol to your paint in order to eliminate brush strokes, but I like to do it this way to find that I get a better result. So here I am lightly sanding after the primer, and I'm going to kind of speed it up a little bit just to where I start painting. So I have lightly sanded. Yes.
Excuse me for 1 second. I'm sorry.
Sure. No, you're fine.
Are you able to share just the YouTube screen? I'm seeing
people. Let me see if it'll let me here.
Yeah.
Hang on, let me pause. Let me pause.
And while you're doing that, everybody, if you have questions, just send your questions to everyone in the chat window.
There we go.
And we'll get them answered for you, okay?
Did that hide the faces?
Yes, it did.
Okay, good. All right.
That's better. Thanks.
Okay. So I use my roller. I apply very thin coats of paint, and then I sand in between each one. And then once you get to your final coat of paint, I do get this question a lot. You're not going to sand your final coat of paint, only in between coats. And I like to wrap my tray and my roller in plastic wrap in between coats, so I don't have to clean up every time because I'm lazy. So that allows me to just set it aside and then come back and use the same brush and the same roller. Now for top coats, let me just hop ahead to the top coat. I like to use a water-based polyacrylic top coat or a furniture paste wax, and that's what I'm using in this video. The way that I apply the furniture paste wax is through multiple layers of cheesecloth. So I will dip my cheesecloth into it and get it nice and thick on there, and then I'll double it over which you'll see here in just a minute. I'll double it over and apply it through a couple of layers. And then I'll let it sit for about 20 minutes or so. And then I come back in with a cotton cloth and buff it. And that allows you to have some control over the sheen that you're going to get, because you can buff it to as shiny as you want. So you can leave it kind of matte, or you can keep buffing it until it gets a little bit glossy. So those are just the absolute basics. And I'm going to show you a few pieces that I have painted. Oops, some examples here. So these are just a few pieces that I've painted over the years. And I have all of these projects on my website and on my YouTube channel. By the way, if you have any questions for me, you can type those in the chat box. I can't see them currently, but Tom can hop in and let me know if there are questions, or we can get to them at the end. Okay, so.
Erin, I have one for you.
Sure.
This is Brian Millam.
Okay.
He says, what kind of preparation and paint should be used on a bathroom vanity where the humidity varies a lot?
That's a great question. So I have always just used this exact same process in a bathroom. Now, I probably would not use the wax just because of the humidity. I would probably go instead. But up until that point, I would just use the exact same process. And that's what I've always done. And I've always had pretty good results by doing that. And I also recommend using either a satin or a semi-gloss finish. Those are easiest to clean and wipe down. You don't want to use a matte finish on furniture of any kind, just because it's very, very difficult to clean. Hopefully. Okay, so moving on, I'm going to show you a couple of different designs that I've done using painter's tape. And this is the first one. I'm going to walk you through step by step how I did this. This is a desk that I built. I have the entire tutorial for the whole project on my site and channel, but we're just going to be talking about how I got that design on the top. So let me get this going here. Okay. So the first thing I did was stain the entire desk with special walnut stain. And of course you can use whatever color you like. I just kind of like to use a little bit darker stain when I'm doing this kind of a technique, so I can get a nice contrast between the lighter paint color and darker stain. So I did that and then let it dry completely. You're going to want to let it dry for a couple of days before the tape will adhere to it very well. So the next thing I did, let me pause this really quickly, is I went around and marked the center point on each side of the desktop. So that's what I'm doing here, is just marking the center. I go around the whole thing. And then I'm going to connect those points using painter's tape. So I'm going to make a diagonal line connecting the points that I just marked. And so basically you're going to mark the center point and then measure halfway and connect those pieces of tape. And then I used the first strips of tape as a guide and lay the next strip of tape right beside it. And then I just keep going until I get to the center point and sort of have a diamond shape in the middle. And you can overlap the edges just like this, because we're going to go in a minute and cut that away. It's easier to do it that way than to try to get your edges lined up perfectly, your ends of your tape perfectly even. So I overlap them till I get to the center. And then I go in and mark an X on every other strip of tape, so I can remember when I'm in the middle of cutting and peeling away the tape, which strips I'm removing. And then I'm going to go in with my X-Acto knife and cut away every other strip of tape. And I use the X-Acto knife because since they are overlapped, it's just easier to do it this way. And I'll let this play just so you can get a visual of what I'm doing. I know sometimes it's easier watching the visual rather than just listening to me explain.
Where did you get that wide green tape? I always see that. I can only find it in inch or inch and a half.
Yeah, so that is frog tape, and it's at Home Depot. That's the only place I've gotten it. I'm not sure if they have it other places as well, but yeah, they have the thicker option too. Yep, frog tape.
Okay.
And that's the kind I usually use. I have found that it just creates a better seal. So I see a lot less like bleed through or bleed under when I use this type of tape.
That's what gives you the nice clean edges. That was the
Yes.
question I was going to ask you.
Yes. So I do like to use frog tape, and then I also go over it kind of with my fingernail or a scraper just to make sure it's really sealed down well. So the next thing I do is take a strip of tape and run it in the opposite direction, connecting the center diamond shape to the outer edge of the desk. And then I go over it and paint it. Now I'm going to pause here for just a second, because this is the exception to the rule I just talked about when I was telling you how to paint furniture. I don't use a separate primer when I'm doing this, and I don't sand because I don't want to mess up the tape. So what I usually do is use a paint with primer built in, and then I apply 2 coats with my roller. I let the first coat dry completely, and then I add a second coat. Then I peel off the tape while the second coat is still damp. And that's really important, because if you wait for it to dry completely, you could peel the paint off with the tape, and we don't want that. So I let it dry completely, and then I come back in and add my top coat, which in this case, I really like using the polyacrylic, the water-based polyacrylic. And there is that finished product. Then I used a similar technique on this next project, but a different design. So I built this little storage bench, and I created sort of an Aztec pattern on the front of the little storage cubbies. So the first thing I did was paint the entire thing white, except for the cubbies. And I stained those dark. And I'm gonna pause this. It's a dark walnut stain on these, because once again, I really wanted a nice contrast between the stain color and the white paint. So then I marked the center point on each side of the front of the little cubby bins here. And then I laid a strip of tape horizontally across the middle of each cubby. And then I added 3 strips of tape on top of that center strip, and then 3 strips of tape below. So there are a total of 7 strips of tape. And by the way, this tape, this is also frog tape, but it is their delicate surface tape. I like to use that over surfaces that I have just recently painted or stained. I've just found that it doesn't pull up the finish as much, as it doesn't have as strong of a seal, so it doesn't pull up.
Do they sell it at Home Depot?
Yeah, they do.
Okay,
Yes.
never seen that.
Yeah. So then I'm going to pause this here, because what I did here is I measured, these are the measurements that I used from the outer edge of the cubby. So 7 inches in from the edge, and then 7.5 inches, and so on. And then I used my pencil to connect the dots, basically to create a diagonal line from each point, except for the center strip, which I just drew a vertical line 1 inch in from the edge. And then,
Erin, we have a couple questions here.
Okay, let me pause. Okay, go right ahead.
The first question is from John Champion.
Okay.
What finish would you use on a painted bookshelf so the paint does not come off on the books?
I would use a minimum of 3 coats of polyacrylic. That's what I've done in the past. I do that for, like, if I'm painting any type of furniture that's going to see a lot of wear or tear, whether it's like a desktop or the top of a dresser, I always use 3 coats of polyacrylic. If it's just the side or a part of it that's not going to see much traffic, I can get away with 2 coats. But that's what I would recommend, and that's what I've had good luck with in the past.
Okay. And then David Homan has a question. Mm-hmm. Am I correct to assume that you are using all water-based paint, stains, and finishes?
Yes. I prefer water-based. I use interior latex paint on my pieces because, well, it's really versatile, but also I have more of a modern style personally. There are a lot of different products out there that you can use depending on what kind of look you're going for. I know that a lot of people who prefer the more kind of shabby chic aged look, the chalk finish paint, which is really popular. It has more of a matte finish, and it's really easy to distress. And I'm going to talk about that more here in a few minutes. But I prefer water-based everything. I don't like the odor of oil-based, and I just don't like working with it personally that much. And I have small kids, and I much prefer water-based. Yeah. All right. So continuing here. So then I take my X-Acto knife again and cut away. I cut along those diagonal lines I just drew and cut away the excess. And then I went back in and cut little small triangles out of tape to put at the top and the bottom of the design. So I stuck those on there and then painted with my roller once again, letting it dry completely after the first coat, and then peeling off the tape while the second coat was still damp. Now, when you go in to peel the tape off, you might have to use your fingernail or kind of a little scraper or something to really get in there and start to peel it off, because you can see it's kind of tricky just grabbing it, just getting a good hold on it at first. But a fingernail or something pointy you can use to get under there, then that makes it easier. So there it is being peeled off. And it's so satisfying, by the way, when you get those crisp lines and you're peeling the tape off. It's great. Okay, so there's the final look. And then I just added hardware to the front and then added my polyacrylic. And there's the look.
Very cool.
Thank you. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is distressing, basic distressing in furniture. I like my general aesthetic in my home is more modern, so I don't have any distressed furniture, but I wanted to just show the general technique. So I'm just going to demo it on a scrap piece of wood just to show you what I've done in the past and how I've gotten this look. So here I am just staining a piece of scrap wood with dark walnut. And so whenever I'm distressing, I like to use a dark stain if I'm using a light paint color, and then kind of a lighter stain if I'm using a dark paint color, because I really like to have a contrast, because when you go into distress, whatever you stained it with or whatever's underneath your flip through. So it's nice to just kind of have some sort of a contrast. So here I am just staining it and then let it dry. Then I just painted it white. And now I'm taking this, let me pause it for a second. This is just a little staining block. You can use anything. You can use a sheet of sandpaper, a sanding sponge, a sanding block. I usually use like 120 or 220 grit. And then I just sand off the finish in the areas where it would naturally age over time. So you're not going to want to do this just like smack dab in the middle of the top of a dresser or anything like that, but around the edges and the corners and places where you would see age naturally. And it's really that easy. And then you just add your top coat after you've sanded it as much as you want. So before I move on to the glaze, does anyone, I know that was really quick, but it's really that basic and simple to get that kind of a look. You just sand off the edges. Oh, I do want to add though, really quickly, if you do like sand off your stain, or you want more of a contrast once you've sanded, you want to touch up the stain underneath, I've seen people use a Q-tip dipped in there, go back over it after you've sanded, kind of go back over that edge just to add a little bit more contrast before you add your top coat.
Right. Couple questions.
Okay.
Shawanda Blackman asking, do you let it dry total first? I assume she's talking about that last project.
Let it dry before sanding, you mean? If that's the question, yes, definitely. Let it dry completely. And because if you don't, it'll get kind of gummy and it'll stick to your sanding block. And so, yeah, let it dry completely and then it'll sand off really easily.
Okay. And Larry Faulkner asked what paint roller is used?
I usually just use the smaller foam rollers, and I don't have a preference on that. I just grab the cheap ones from Home Depot. But I like the foam ones just because I get a a smoother finish with that, and it doesn't leave marks as much as the Napier rollers do. Okay.
And Dave Albin asked, what do you do about the cuts in the furniture you make to remove the tape?
Aren't really noticeable, actually. Like when you're cutting, you do have to be careful not to cut too deep when you're cutting the tape, but when I cut through the tape, I don't really cut into the wood enough for it to even be noticeable at all. So you just have to like give it a little bit of a light touch. You don't want to dig in too deep.
That's skill.
Thank you. Well, the tape is thick enough that it's actually to kind of just cut away. You just
cut
kind
it
of go
lightly,
slowly.
and if it doesn't remove easily, just cut it again a little bit, I guess.
Yes, exactly. You just go slowly. Yes.
Okay. That's it for questions for now.
Okay. So this is the final look I want to talk about. And it's more antiquing, more of an aged look. I don't have a video for this, but I want this technique. So this is a project that I replicated many years ago for my son's room. And I wanted to share the original because this was the inspiration for my project. And this was done by Sarah Macklem from the yellowcapecod.com. And I copied it exactly, but I wanted to share the technique because I just think it's a really cool way to get sort of that more aged vintage look. So she painted the dresser lime green, obviously, but then she applied a stain glaze mix. And the way that she did that was she mixed 1 part dark walnut stain with 3 parts glaze. And she used just a translucent mixing glaze. I'm pretty sure it was Valspar glaze. And she then brushed on in sections. She brushed it on the whole dresser and then wiped it away with a cotton cloth. So the glaze, what that does, it just helps the stain from drying too quickly, which then allows you to blend it better and wipe it away more easily. And then it also helps it maintain sort of a more durable finish. So when I did this, I actually didn't even add a top coat. I just let it on its own. So then when you wipe it away, it gets left behind in the little nooks and crannies and crevices. So you get that nice kind of contrast that looks naturally aged. So I really, really love that. And you can use any color stain you want, just depending on what color paint you're using first. And really any clear glaze would work with you. So let's see here. Oh, and then, but you could actually add a top coat if you wanted to add a polyacrylic or something like that on top, you could, or furniture paste wax as well for added protection. But my son has had the dresser that I did for years and it has held up just fine without one. So generally it takes about 30 days or so for paint to cure on its own. Don't add top coat or anything. So if you are going to go that route, I would just take it easy on the surface of it for about a month, you know, before you let it start getting really heavy wear and tear, if that makes sense. So I will, if you guys have any other questions just in general about furniture painting, I do have like tons of tutorials and more project ideas on my website and on my YouTube channel and Instagram, which you can find me there. And if you have any questions that you think of later on, you're welcome to contact me any of those places, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. But I think that covers the basics. Let me
Thank you, Erin. I don't see any other questions.
Great. Okay. I hope that was informative enough. I know that some of the videos are really quick, but honestly, it's not as hard as you think. It's actually a really, really easy thing to do. And I'm a DIYer. I'm not a fine woodworker like all of you. So I do, when I'm building the pieces that I'm painting, I usually use like pine or something cheap that I don't mind painting, or, you know.
That's okay. The only worker is John Jones.
Okay. Good to know.
Well, why would you not do a top coat?
It just depends. For that particular piece, it really just didn't need it. The glaze added enough durability that I just didn't really see the need for it. But you certainly could if you wanted to.
Okay.
It's just less work.
Well, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, yeah.
Less work, yeah.
Yeah, I'm all about saving time and taking the easiest route possible.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
John Jones asked, does Erin do this as a business?
I don't, well, yes and no. My business is my blog and YouTube channel. That's what I do for a living. I sell pieces or do custom work. I just share my tutorials online and work with brands and you know, get ad revenue and stuff like that. But I don't sell pieces. Okay.
And then Kim Mothersboro asked, do you have a preferred wood filler?
Oh, what is the one that I use? I think it's Elmer's actually, or wood fillers, what I typically use, but I don't really have like loyalty to any certain brand. I think they're all good enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?